Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you on behalf of our Board of Trustees, our faculty, staff, administrators, alumni, and community folks to this very important conversation we're going to have today. My name is Frank Chong. I have the honor and privilege of serving as Superintendent President. I'd also like to introduce the President of our board who took time to come out here today, Maggie Fishman. Thank you for being here, Maggie. And I really appreciate that. Let's give her a round of applause. You know, the gun violence issue is something that has been with us for a long time. And it's really taken somebody with some courage to really take it on as a public policy issue. And I know Congressman Thompson. I've known him for over 30 years. In fact, when I first got out of college, I interviewed for a job, and the person who interviewed me was Mike Thompson. So you never know who you're going to meet up with, and now he's a congressman, so we go back a long ways. But I really appreciate the faculty members for being here, students, and our police lieutenant for being here as well. This is something that's really important to us. You know, one of my good friends, Chewy Sang, was the former president of Santa Monica College, and a few years ago, they had a shooting there. Umpqua Community College up in Oregon, there was a shooting there. Sandy Hook, Stoneman Douglas, whatever, just keep going on and on. It's almost a daily occurrence that we become numb to it, but we can't because human lives are at stake. Students, faculty, staff, we're all on the front lines, and my worst nightmare is to get that call that there's something would happen at SRJC. So without further ado, it's my honor and privilege to introduce our congressman and a good friend of mine. Let's give him a warm round of applause, Mike Thompson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Chong. Thank you for the nice introduction. And if you recall on that interview, I told you, someday you're going to be the president of Santa Rosa Junior College. So I could see the potential even back then. And you've been doing a great job ever since. Thank you all for being here. I'm not only the representative from California's 5th Congressional District, but I also chair the task force on gun violence prevention in the United States Congress. I have had that position since the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School, and I can tell you that I've worked on gun violence prevention every day since. And I will commit to you that I will not stop until we have the success that everybody throughout every one of our communities deserves. And that's the ability to go to school, to go to a nightclub, to go to a concert, to go to the mall, to walk down the street without the fear of being gunned down. This is every day there seems to be another gun violence issue that is raised. We were talking before we started this morning. Someone said, well, there was just one yesterday. And I looked at my phone and I said, there's just one right now in Texas while we're talking. It seems as though it's never ending. And we owe it to the people that we serve to make sure we do everything within our power to make the communities more safe and to ensure that people who shouldn't have guns don't get guns. And my big effort in Congress is to expand the background checks. The background check that one should have to go through before they can obtain a firearm. Everybody agrees, or everybody claims to agree, that they don't want people who are dangerously mentally ill, domestic abusers, or dangerous criminals to be able to get firearms. Well, the only way you can ensure that that doesn't happen is if you have some sort of background check. It's the first line of defense against those folks who shouldn't have guns from getting guns. I first introduced this bill right after Sandy Hook 5.5 years ago. The most success we've ever received in Congress on it is to get 196 co-authors, 5 of them Republicans. Not bad, but a long way to where we need to be. I can tell you that this year in Congress, I have 207 co-authors, and 14 of them are Republicans. So we continue to grow, we continue to expand our influence, and I guarantee you we will get this bill passed at some point. And I'll keep working on it till it happens, but it's more than just a congressional effort. It's got to be a community effort. The outside influence, the grassroots influence has to come to bear on those folks who are disallowing us from being able to have success in this regard. I don't like to be partisan when I hold these meetings, but I can tell you it is in fact a Republican issue. The House of Representatives and the Senate is controlled by the Republican Party. The Republicans will not allow us to have a hearing on this legislation, and they will not allow us to have a vote on this legislation. We need to do everything we can to make life very uncomfortable for them, so they will in fact allow us hearings and allow us a vote. And if we get a vote, we will pass this legislation and our communities will be much safer. I'm honored to be with you today, and I'm honored to be on the panel with some great panelists. I'm going to introduce them. Each panelist will have 3 minutes to make their presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. We'll start with Evelyn Navarro, who's the Santa Rosa JC Student Government Assembly President. Evelyn, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you for that amazing introduction. My name is Evelyn Navarro Shindros. Mi nombre es Evelyn Navarro Shindros. Buenas tardes a todos. Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, as always, represented as your Student Government Assembly President. At this time, as we know, we're in times of turmoil, and of this, of course, is another unnecessary burden on us. However, it is up to us to be that voice, to be that change, to be that positive catalyst for change. For me, students is just another word for community. Students make up the community, and the community is made up of students. And when we're talking about this as a student issue, this is really a community issue. How are we as a community? So consisting of not just students, but your friends, family, neighbors, brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers. How are we going to move forward to make that change? We see there's a lot of discussion happening. We're here in a panel continuing that discussion. But I hope that we take this and move forward with some more action. I am incredibly, incredibly proud and inspired by our high school students, middle school students. We have the honor of having a high school student here. It's an incredible honor. These students are amazing activists. They're making moves in their community with less ability than a lot of us have, whether it's as a minor, whether it's as a young person who is not sometimes taken so seriously in our society, whether it's a young person of color who is not taken seriously because of the color of their skin. These young people have to face a lot of hindrances, but they do so beautifully, majestically, and magically, through their efforts, through their power, through their leadership, and most of all, through their community and unity efforts. And that is something that we need to replicate not only at SRJC, but in our communities. Thank you.
Evelyn, thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from Jonah Gottlieb, and he is from Credo High School in Roanoke Park, and we met last week. And he set up an incredible student town hall meeting on the issues of gun violence prevention. I was very impressed with the job you did, and I'm glad you're on the panel. You've got 3 minutes.
So like the Congressman said, I have organized walkouts and I've organized town halls. I'm also the president of our school's Global Awareness Club, which focuses on the education of students and faculty on important political and social issues. And I've just been active in a bunch of political issues for quite some time. On February 10th, I attended a seminar on legislative issues in Washington, D.C., and one of the workshops I attended was entitled Gun Violence Prevention. In the workshop, we drafted sample legislation about background checks, specific arms bans, hunting weaponry, and concealed carry permits. One of the kids in my group was from Chicago, and he had family in Santa Rosa, so we started a conversation. He explained to me that he had developed a passion for safer gun laws after being shocked by the rampant gun violence he saw in Chicago after he moved from a small town in Florida. As we all know, 4 days later, on February 14th, the Parkland massacre occurred. Later that day, as I was talking to my club's co-president about how to discuss the tragedy at our next meeting, I got a Snapchat and soon learned that the boy I had met in D.C. had previously attended Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, and that one of his closest friends had been killed in the shooting. As shocked as shocked as I was to learn that someone I knew had been directly affected, after doing a little research, I discovered that my experience wasn't particularly uncommon. Using data from the CDC, Science Direct and Preventative Medicine have determined that Americans have a 99.85% of knowing a direct victim of gun violence in their lifetime. This fact was made even clearer when I learned that my friend's mom had worked very closely with 2 of the women killed in the attack on the Veterans Home in Yountville. The shooting there occurred 5 days before my school's first walkout, which I organized and spoke at. Despite the event being optional, every single student left their classes. As I addressed the entire student body and every single faculty member, I unveiled a daunting prediction. Unless something is done soon, the violence will personally affect every single one of us. So that's why I am so active. That's why I organized the March for Our Lives, and that's why I spoke there, because we need to do something for purely selfish reasons if saving other innocent lives isn't good enough, because we need to do more to save ourselves, because eventually someone we know will be gunned down, and it's only a matter of time. So, as the Congressman said, on Friday, Gun Violence Awareness Week at Credo High School culminated with the school-wide Q&A session. So we had students give speeches, create art pieces, and perform poems and songs. And I think the most important thing we did was pre-registering students to vote. So we had dozens of students that are now set up to vote and make choices for their future. So to be honest, I don't believe that the 115th Congress will pass any legislation regarding national gun violence and this epidemic because congressional leadership refuses to discuss any form of common sense gun regulations. However, due to the high level of activism among my generation and yours, I have full faith that in the midterm elections, we'll see a dramatic change in congressional leadership, and come January, the 116th Congress will be much more equipped to pass legislation that will save lives. So as long as people among all generations and all demographics elect candidates who will end these shootings, that's how we can really make a difference. So please become an activist, attend marches and rallies, plan marches and rallies, vote, tell your friends who live in districts who aren't represented by people to handle this issue as well as Congressman Thompson does, to elect people who will do just as good of a job as the Congressman will, because we need more leaders like him on the Capitol Hill, and we need more people to find a solution to this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good job. And now we'll hear from the faculty representative from Santa Rosa Junior College, Jeffrey Diamond.
Good afternoon. I didn't really prepare any written statements, but there are a couple of things that I'd like to share. First off, I appreciate the work that Mike Thompson has done with the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, and he was talking about the requiring of background checks. Obviously, that's something that's very important, some legislation that really needs to be passed. In addition, I know as part of that platform, there is a requirement to reinstate a prospective federal ban on assault weapons and assault magazines, and I think that that's something that a lot of students are very involved with. I know that the Parkside shooting, the students who have been facilitating demonstrations around that are trying to facilitate legislation in that regard as well. I think that's another very important part of that. I think almost all police departments and law enforcement agencies support a ban on assault weapons, and I think that should be as well a no-brainer. Hopefully the powers that be are listening to Jonah, and next legislative session there will be some serious changes that will allow us to enact some of that legislation. From a faculty perspective, just as before I say anything else, as a precursor, my views as a faculty member reflect simply my opinion. I don't speak for the faculty. I know that we've had a lot of lively conversations in our distribution list, which is one of our foundations of our democracy here at Santa Rosa Junior College, and that's a very interesting conversation to be part of. Institutionally, I think there's a couple of things that I want to comment on. First, the fact that we have the opportunity to receive active shooter training is extremely important. We have that opportunity, and I've received some of those trainings on our professional development days. And while that is great, I think that's something that we need to be, just like CPR, you have to be re-upped every year or so. I think we need to be refreshed in our active shooter training protocols on a regular basis. My personal opinion is that that's something that all faculty should be, if not required to do, strongly encouraged to do. So I appreciate the fact that institutionally we've really focused on active shooter training as something that we should have under our belts. On another, perhaps less optimistic note, I think when it came to National School Walkout Day, institutionally, we missed the ball. We had an opportunity to say that we as a community support our students walking out and saying enough with the violence. And unfortunately, that didn't happen, so it became an ad hoc demonstration of support for our students and for our community. And I hope going forward, when we have an opportunity to make a statement as a community, that we do it in a unified manner and say we are against gun violence, and we want to, as an institution, show that in a very demonstratable way, such as the National School Walkout. But you know, ending on a positive note, I think that we have lots of opportunity as faculty and as a student body and as our staff to have sufficient training to be prepared for a situation if we come into a circumstance where there's violence on campus, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, Lieutenant Brownlee from the Santa Rosa Junior College District Police.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Congressman, and the rest of the panel for your work on this. As the stats show, I think a majority of Americans right now want some form of gun control. Most law enforcement simply want to keep the guns out of the people that shouldn't have them. That's what I get from all my peers. As far as the active shooter phenomenon, and Jeffrey, thank you for saying what you did. Our police department here at the Santa Rosa Junior College, your police department, they are a state-sanctioned police department. They receive the same training that officers do throughout the state. Additionally, they have received over the past 10+ years active shooter training, tactical training on how to deal with active shooter situations. As law enforcement has learned more from these incidents, which unfortunately seem to be occurring daily now, we continue to adapt our tactics so that we can react quicker and save more lives. We work with Santa Rosa Police Department, with the Sheriff's Department. We are part of a larger team in Sonoma County, and we are prepared. Also, we have done several presentations to our community, to students, to staff, so that you know the three basic principles, whether it's at school, whether it's in a mall, whether it's at a military installation, of what to do in an active shooter situation. And that is run, remove yourself from the situation as quickly as possible. That's your best option. 2, hide. If you can't remove yourself from the situation, if you're pinned down in an area, your option may be to hide. Secure yourself someplace, a closet, a classroom, as best you can. And the third tactic is fight. If you're presented with that threat, with that person whose sole purpose is to end your life, you can protect yourself and you can protect others, and by doing so, fight. We at the Santa Rosa Junior College District Police, we're prepared to do that, and we provide you with that training. Also at the Santa Rosa Junior College, we also have what's called a CIRT team, a Crisis Intervention Response Team. And this team comprises of professionals from student discipline, student psych services, health services, Sonoma County Mental Health Behavioral Services, and we meet behind the scenes and we discuss issues of students that are in distress, who are disruptive and who are also dangerous. And we do threat assessments throughout the year. We meet bi-weekly, and we are continually doing things behind the scenes to keep our community as safe as possible. So there are things that are going on that you may not be aware of that we're doing to protect you. And we're doing everything that we can within our ability right now. And we support Congressman, his effort to further gun control. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all the panelists. You did an outstanding job. And now I'm going to invite Student Trustee Robert Martinez to come up to the podium. And there's folks who have submitted question cards. Robert's going to read them, and somebody will try and answer.
Awesome. Thank you, Congressman. And let's have a big round of applause for the panelists who showed up today. All right, and if it takes me a while to read this, please forgive me. Okay, so the first question is comment. A point of agreement for both sides of this debate is that mental health is an issue that desires more attention. You support better access to mental health, but do you think Congress will take action on this issue, or does it need to be addressed on the state or local level? I believe that is a question that's more pointed towards Congressman.
Well, thank you very much, and it's an excellent question. Clearly, mental health, with or without the gun violence provision, is an important issue. I think if I had a magic wand and was told that I could wave it and solve any problem that we as Americans face, I think it would be mental health. It spills over into every aspect of our everyday life. It impacts our housing issues and our drug abuse issues, alcoholism, family problems. It is clearly a major issue, and one that no level of government has come anywhere near where they need to be in regard to addressing it. When I first went to Congress, the effort was to try and do parity between mental health and regular health services. And that finally came to fruition, if you recall, with the Affordable Care Act, where mental health was finally recognized with the same standing as physical health. And as you know, that passed. And in this administration, there has been a nonstop effort to disassemble the Affordable Care Act and mental health services. There's been proposals to cut funding for the mental health component. There's been efforts to do away with the Affordable Care Act, all of which would impact negatively all efforts to deal with mental health issues. So the answer is yes on the general issue, and specifically, there are a lot of mental health associated laws and practices as it pertains to gun violence that needs to be revamped as well. And we should be doing a lot of that. We were talking before, and Jeffrey, you were, I don't know if I should say it this way, but to me it seemed like you were surprised to learn that California has more tools available to them for interceding when there's a mental health problem. And in California we do. The state legislature passed a bill, it was signed into law, that allows law enforcement to do restraining orders on a person's ability to own a firearm if there is believed to be, and there's a process you have to go through, a mental health issue that could cause that person to use that firearm in a way that would endanger him or himself or others. And our 5150 process, which does the same thing, is not something that is shared across state lines. There are only a handful of states that have that provision. So yeah, there's a lot we can do in regard to mental health, but don't ever allow anybody to deflect the issue of gun violence prevention by saying, oh, it's a mental health issue. Mental health is part of every problem that we have, but don't let them deflect. We need to do gun violence prevention legislation for the sake of our communities.
Thank you. That was a very powerful answer. Is there any other, anyone else would like to comment on that, please?
So, yes, there is much talk on both sides of the political spectrum about it definitely being, mental health definitely being a large component of the gun violence issue. However, there's really only been action on this from one side. The Trump administration, about a year ago, repealed some Obama-era regulations that actually prevented guns from being in the hands of people with serious mental problems. And, you know, we saw that this is obviously still a pressing issue, but there have been many instances in this past year of people who have committed these atrocities who wouldn't have been allowed firearms, but they have them because of this rollback of regulations.
Okay, and seeing no one else, we'll move on to our next question. I feel like this has been answered, but I'm guessing that this person wants this to be touched on a little bit more, so keep that in mind. Could purchasing a gun require a Psych Eval? And I'm guessing that's with did you get that? So could purchasing a gun require a Psych evaluation? And so I'm guessing that's asking any legislation that you were to pass.
Well, the way it works right now, from a federal perspective, the federal law states that any federally licensed gun dealer who sells someone a firearm has to go through the background check process. So if you go to a federally licensed dealer to buy a gun, there's a questionnaire that you have to fill out. That is electronically transferred to a federal entity that reviews the information that you gave and your background to see if you are eligible to own a firearm. If so, it comes back and states that you can legally buy the firearm. If it comes back and says you're prohibited from buying a firearm, you can't buy the gun. The problem is, and some states have higher levels of protection, such as California. In California, anybody who transfers a firearm, if I take one of my guns and give it to my son, we have to go get a background check for my son. So we have very high bar in California. But a number of states, the ceiling is the federal floor. And in those states, someone can come in, buy a gun, they do the background check, and they're found to be prohibited. They can walk out the door and go down the street to a gun show and buy the same gun. They can go down the street, get on their computer, and over the internet buy the same gun. So there's no protection from those folks getting a hold of a firearm they shouldn't have. That's what we're trying to find out. The standards are pretty high that you're referenced against, and if you don't clear those standards through the background check, you don't get the gun.
All right. Thank you for that answer. Is there any other further answers? Okay. Going on to the next question. Okay. How do you deal with people from mostly your own party that want to hijack the conversation about reasonable gun control or gun violence prevention and make it about repealing the Second Amendment? Again, I
guess
think
that's
this
me.
is, yeah, I would assume so.
Yeah, you know, it's an issue. Everybody is certainly entitled to their own position on any number of legislative proposals. But the trick here, when you're talking about guns, because guns do have a constitutional protection, the issue is how do you thread the needle? Because it's all about winning the confidence and the support of the American people. If you can't do that, you can't be successful in any type of legislative effort. So it's got to be done in such a way as you don't alienate folks. Now, you're always going to have people who on one side of the aisle think there should be no laws, rules, or regulations when it comes to guns. It's your constitutional right, everything else be damned. And then you're going to have one group of people who believe you shouldn't have guns. They should just be outlawed. So the trick here, the science or the art in this is to get that group in the middle and figure out what you can do to protect the American people and still protect the Second Amendment. And so when folks start talking about, well, we're going to take away all the guns or we're going to repeal the Second Amendment, it does cause a problem. And the criticism that I will hear is, yeah, you say you only want to do background checks to keep criminals and the dangerously mentally ill from getting guns, but it's the proverbial camel's nose in the tent, the slippery slope. Today it's background checks, tomorrow it's this, the next day it's that. Pretty soon we're not going to have any guns. And that's not what we're trying to do here. We recognize the Second Amendment, and in 2000, I think it was 2005, there was a Supreme Court decision called the Heller decision. It was Heller versus the District of Columbia that said, that clarified that long-standing argument about the Second Amendment. The Heller decision opined that you have a constitutional right to own a firearm. But also in that decision, the Supreme Court said there can be reasonable restrictions against those rights to own a firearm. And I think that Heller decision really set the table for doing responsible, reasonable gun violence prevention legislation, and hopefully folks in my party will see themselves clear to understand that and to work with us so we can keep our communities safe.
All right, thank you. Is there any other comment on that? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago. I don't recall exactly, but I think it was Stephen Breyer, former Supreme Court Justice, who brought up the Heller decision, and that it is time to examine the Second Amendment specifically as it's related to 200 years after it was written, that things that we're not in a static time, things have changed, and the weaponry that's available to people now is not what was envisioned when the signers of the Constitution created the Constitution. So I think it's really important to reassure people that the Second Amendment has its reason for being, but there are limitations that we need to examine in the context of today. I thought it was also interesting when Congressman Thompson was talking about the camel's nose in the tent, and it made me think about somebody saying, yeah, you're going to stop 100-year-old blind people from getting a driver's license, and when is it going to stop? I mean, obviously, not everybody should have a license for everything. It's not a either or. Everything is nuanced, and in the politicized world that we live in today, we're losing that sense of nuance. And I think it's really important that we make sure to speak with calm voices and be persistent, though. Remind people, by the way, you never really addressed the fact that not everybody should have a right to everything.
Yes.
I'd just like to add one thing. You're right, and I think when the former justice stated that we should reevaluate the Second Amendment, I think he called for the repeal of the Second Amendment. I would just submit that we have reviewed it, and the last review took place in the U.S. Supreme Court with Heller. And I thought that they were fairly thoughtful in explaining that, yeah, you have the right, but things have changed in 200 years, so here's the deal. There can be responsible, reasonable restrictions on that right. So it was an update of that original amendment. But politically speaking, and you have, at some point, you have to factor in the political side of it. And politically speaking, if somehow we shift this to a discussion about repealing an amendment that's in the Constitution or amending the Constitution, we're going to lose all the ground we've gained. because it'll be all about the Constitution, and it won't be about should people who are dangerous be able to get their hands on guns. We have to be real careful with that.
Thank you. Is there any further comment? Okay. Lieutenant Brownlee, I would guess this is more a question for you. Is it possible to set up online active shooter training similar to the sexual harassment training, what happens each semester?
I would say yes. As a matter of fact, we're working with the Environmental Health and Safety Office to get at least the video posted online and onto our website, but also looking at similar type of training that they do with sexual harassment, which is a little bit more interactive, but we're pursuing those.
Okay. So you are looking at doing trainings right now?
Yes.
Okay.
But we will still continue with our traditional training of providing presentations to faculty and staff, and then doing our hands-on, which we only can do to staff right now because of the nature of it. We need 5 instructors to make sure that a class of 20 can perform those exercises safely. So that type of training is a little bit more difficult to do en masse.
Okay. Thank you. And a lot of these questions are for Congressman Thompson. I'm going to try and switch it up as much as I can. But what is defined as an assault rifle, and how do you determine what makes an assault rifle?
Well, I don't attempt to define what an assault weapon is. Every time there's been a law written, be it a state statute or a federal statute, there has been a definition associated with assault weapons. Matter of fact, when I talk about them, I usually refer to them as assault weapon platforms, because there's a ton of different ones. And what we've found in the past is whenever an assault weapon is defined in statute, one of the common ways to work around the prohibition is for the manufacturers to change something. So if the statute says it's a semi-automatic weapon with a black stock, they'll come out with green stocks next week, and they work around it. It's a tough one to do. If you're going to write a statute, you write it to the best of your ability. And if a law were passed and signed into law, it wouldn't be any different than any other law that's passed. If you've got a law dealing with, community colleges or state universities or city councils, as soon as the thing's signed into law, you better start working on it, because it's going to be outdated tomorrow. So you never solve a problem with legislation, no matter what it is. We could all sit down and agree on what a problem is, and we could all sit down and write a bill to fix that problem. But you don't fix it, you address the problem. Because as soon as it's passed, signed into law, something happens. There's unintended consequences, things change, so you're constantly working on it. But the issue is going to be one that we chase for a long time. The issue of banning assault-style platform weapons is going to be a tough one to do, no matter how you address it. If for no other reason, there's somewhere between 9 and 15 million of them in civilian ownership right now. So at some point, it just becomes difficult to unring that bell. So that's why we've focused on the issue that we believe will save the most lives the quickest, and that's background checks to keep people who shouldn't have guns from getting guns.
Thank you. Is there any other comment on that? Okay.
Just to follow up from a law enforcement standpoint, and we're fairly familiar with firearms, oftentimes it's the internal components where we have to do an investigation to determine whether or not it's an illegal assault-style firearm. It could be something in the firearm itself. And sometimes it's so specific to identify it that even if our officers come across something, we'll confiscate that firearm, but we'll reach out to a federal agency such as the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, to confirm on whether or not it is a legal weapon. So there's a lot of complications in the laws right now, but just rest assured that if we believe that something is illegal, we have the right to confiscate it and then to confirm that if it is illegal or not.
Let me add one thing. It's a common belief is that a regular regular citizen can't own a fully automatic weapon. That's usually the distinction. If you buy an assault-style firearm at the sporting goods store, it's a semi-automatic. It may look just like the fully automatic version, but it's semi-automatic. That means for every time it fires, you have to pull the trigger. Fully automatic means you pull the trigger and hold it down, and it continues to fire till the magazine is empty. You can own fully automatic weapons, but it's a much higher standard in order to get one. The permit's very expensive. The background check is extensive. You're on record. You're listed. Folks really watch out for that. Now, the interesting thing is, in this whole discussion, is a few years ago they came out with an accessory. You may have heard it. It's called a bump stock. A year ago, nobody knew what that was. I tried to get ATF to ban bump stocks, and they told me, sorry, can't do it. It's an accessory. We don't have the jurisdiction to do that. A lot of my colleagues said, well, what's a bump stock? I don't even know what that is. Everybody knows what it is today, because in the Las Vegas massacre, 58 people killed, the perpetrator had semi-automatic weapons, legally purchased, legal to own weapons. Remember, pull the trigger, shoots once. Pull it again, it shoots a second time. He equipped him with the bump stocks, which is the accessory that if you put on a semi-automatic weapon, it causes it to fire as though it were a fully automatic weapon. Something that's illegal. So how in the world can you have, it's illegal for Jeffrey to own a fully automatic weapon, but he can buy a semi-automatic weapon, put a $25 accessory on it, and then it fires as though it's the one that you're illegal to have. And that's been a difficult one to work through. There's ATF says we can't do it regulatorily. You have to have a bill. We have a couple pieces of legislation in Congress to deal with that, and we have a Republican leadership in the House and the Senate that will not bring it up for a vote. So that's how tough. And that's not even trying to define the weapon. That's a pretty straightforward, simple one.
Thank you, Congressman. And you're right. And I think the focus on background checks is the priority. I saw a officer safety bulletin the other day where there's a modification to Glock pistols that can be made with a 3D printer. And all they need is the software, and they can modify a Glock pistol into an automatic weapon. So I think people are going to always be creative, and we're always going to be seeing these things. So I think we really need to focus on what the heart of the issue is.
And we saw it with the build your own stuff. You can buy, there's a name for them, ghost guns. You can legally buy the components to build an assault platform weapon. And you don't have to go through any of the rules. In California, if you buy an assault weapon, you are registered. The government has your name. And you can do the ghost weapon stuff without violating any laws, without being on any registry. You could just, and we have no idea how many of those are out there.
You know, in regard to the bump stock, I know about a month ago, right after the Parkside shooting, Dick's Sporting Goods stopped selling bump stocks. And I think one of the things, if I was sitting in the audience or sitting right here, we get so disempowered by all of the aspects of this incredibly difficult situation that seem beyond our control. Well, we live in a capitalist society, and one of the advantages of that is we can support businesses that support our line of thinking. So I know that Dick's Sporting Goods, as an example, got a lot of support from their decision to stop selling those bump stocks. And I think what we can do as individuals is to continue to be very active, and you know, my hats go off to especially the high school students who have stood up and taken control of this issue. And you know, I watch over and over the way they discussed the issue with Marco Rubio, the senator of Florida, and they were so clear and so truthful and so straightforward, and it was just brilliant. But what we can do as individuals is we can support those businesses that support our belief that there should be gun control, and we can write letters to those businesses and write letters to our friends to help them make decisions to put our pocketbooks where our thinking is. So.
All right, thank you. I'd actually like to move on to
Let me
the
add
next-
one thing to that.
Okay, really quick.
You say write letters and support those businesses. I'm just going to give you a little story to let you know how important that is. The family that owns Dick's Sporting Goods, I know, and I know them because the sister ran for Congress last year, and I supported her. And right after they came out with that decision, I got a phone call from her, and she said, Mike, she says, her brother runs the business. She said, Mike, my brother's company, it was more than bump stocks, it was the whole assault weapon stuff, and said, my brother made the decision to do this. They figured it was going to cost them business, but he did it because it was the right thing to do. He said, no members of Congress have called him to thank him. So give me his number, I'll call him right now. But just to let you know, they did what was right for the right reason. And even though they're a big company and a private business, they really like to know that their constituents thought it was the right thing to do. So you're right. Write them a letter, let them know. Gordo Beans in Napa, they made a decision to not to use FedEx because FedEx gives a discount to NRA members. And they were upset about it. And Steve, the guy that owns it, wrote him a letter and said, either change this policy or I'm not going to ship the beans I sell on FedEx anymore. And I read that and I kind of thought, oh, that's going to really, influence them. How many beans can you possibly be selling? And the next week I was on a panel with them, and I said, so Steve, I said, what's happening with this? And he said, well, I hope it sent a message. He said, we send on FedEx over $500,000 a year worth of beans, and they just lost our business. It's $500,000 for a bean company in Napa. So it means something to these guys. So, let them know that their corporate decision, when it's the right decision, means something to you.
All right, thank you for those answers. And that kind of helps go into this next question. And I point this to the students first, and then the Congressman, if you'd like to further address this. What can students do to push for gun control? What are students doing to fight for gun control? What can they do, and what are they doing?
So first and foremost, vote and get everyone you know to vote, because right now the majority of Americans favor much of the regulations that are being proposed related to gun control and favor more mental health care. The problem is that the majority of Americans also aren't voting for that, and they're not voting at all. So just tell your friends, get everyone to vote. I've talked to, my grandmother lives in Fresno, so I've talked to her, and I've talked to some of my friends there, and they're represented, of course, by Devin Nunes, the Republican congressman, and they've really worked hard to talk to him and get him to work on his gun control policy, and if they don't, they're all prepared to vote against him come November. Another way to help is just, again, pay with your dollars and support businesses who are against us. I know Walmart was another business who recently decided to stop selling assault weapons and bump stocks. You can attend marches and rallies. You can organize marches and rallies. They're happening all the time. I know the Parkland students are planning town halls across the country, both online and in person. And you can also just, organize more events like this. Keep talking to people, keep contacting your representatives, because all of it does matter.
Please.
I wanted to touch on the I guess it's not an issue, but the possibility of activism through voting, and especially going out through March. Something that is ignored quite often, especially when it comes to voting and marching, is that there are a community of people, community of students here as well, that cannot vote, that do not feel comfortable going to these marches. For the reasons that they may be undocumented, they may choose not to vote, or they Simply don't feel comfortable in that process of voting. And we have to be cognizant of the community, our undocumented community, because they are still our community. They are still our students. That goes on line in line with marching as well. Some students, some individuals don't feel safe, nor are they safe marching in public. The possibility of deportation, the possibility of being assaulted simply because of the color of their skin tone is very prevalent still, regardless of the issues that are happening at hand. And I think one of the issues to combat that is communication. Sometimes as students, as community, especially that we are informing ourselves about gun control, gun violence, is that we're sometimes in our own echo chamber. We hear other people that are discussing the same manners, and we're just going around in circles discussing it. And sometimes as well, especially of communities of different cultures, communities of different, other than our own, we don't inform them, we don't pass the message along and continue that conversation elsewhere. And so I think it's our obligation, not only as students, but as I mentioned, community, to continue that conversation elsewhere, continue it in our homes. I know for myself, I identify as Latinx, my mother is Latinx as well, she's Latina. And this is a conversation that isn't really had in our household. It wasn't really introduced until I introduced it. I have a little brother, and the possibility of something happening to him, something happening that has happened in other schools is unthinkable, something that I don't really even want to speak about. But it needs to be spoken about. It needs to be communicated to all generations, to all individuals, to all community. This isn't just a young person's problem. This isn't just a student problem. This is an everybody problem. The statistics that Jonah shared are, quite frankly, frightening. Frightening to know that so many people are in contact with individuals who are have been victims of gun violence. And quite frankly, we need to continue that conversation, not just for us, but for our community.
Thank you for that question, because I think it's critical to our success. And first, I want to shout out to the student leaders across the United States of America who've taken this issue on. This is going to be very, very important. If you think about it, it was young leaders who got us the Voting Rights Act. It was young leaders who got us out of the Vietnam War. I truly believe it's going to be young leaders who get us the reforms we need that's going to bring about a safer community because of gun violence prevention. And I think the young leaders not only are real active in this, they are a force. I'll give you one number, 300,000. That's the number of 17-year-olds in Florida who are going to be eligible to vote in November. And you think about what happened. They have a governor down there who's never done anything to cross the NRA. They have a legislature down there who's been so pro-gun it's unthinkable. And after Parkland, and after the Parkland students organized and started working, they passed legislation in record time to put gun laws on the books that made their community safer, and this governor signed it. 300,000 of them are getting ready to vote this November. And those numbers are similar across every state in the nation, and certainly adjusted for state populations. And then when I was at Credo, you guys had something that I thought was really impressive. They put up, Jonah and his team put up on the wall where we were having the town hall meeting, the name of every school where there had been a shooting since Columbine. And it was 16,000, I think it was, 16,000 plus schools. I was so impressed with that, I got their thumb drive and copied those, and my staff lined those on the stairway in my office going from the second floor down, took a photograph of that, put it on my Facebook, just to show the visual of how terrible this situation is. So we need to keep doing things to heighten awareness. On June 30th, I'm sponsoring a bicycle ride in Yountville to draw attention to gun violence prevention. Provoked by, and I wear the band today, the 3 women who were murdered at the Yountville Veterans Home by someone who came on campus with an assault weapon and a shotgun and just destroyed the lives of not only those women but the families and the communities. So you got to organize, you got to be smart, you got to figure out different ways to highlight this issue. And one thing I recommended to Jonah and his school was I'd like to see all of our schools and all of our students who are interested in this to challenge their peers in congressional districts, and you can start just in California. There's not one single, every Democratic member of Congress from California is a co-sponsor of my bill. There's not one single Republican. And it should be a slam dunk. Our California laws are already stricter than the bill that I'm trying to pass. So challenge your peers. Go out to different community colleges in these Republican districts or different high schools in these Republican districts and say, start a movement. Stand up, organize, shout out, bring pressure. Because these guys are not going to do it on their own. They've got to feel the pressure from their community. And I strongly believe that student leaders can make it happen.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah, I just want to pile on to that. You know, one of the things that we kind of experience in Sonoma County, we kind of live a little bit in a bubble. I live in the town of Sebastopol, as a matter of fact. And as we pretty much know, you know, the thinking there is pretty progressive in general. Yet, California has various very conservative regions. So one of the things that I hope that, first of all, I agree with Congressman Thompson that it's the young people who are going to bring this next generation of change. I think they've shown that leadership in this last crisis, and I really was incredibly impressed with that, and hopefully will continue to be so. But one of the things that is happening in a few months is the November election, and very often students get involved with various electoral candidacies, and one of the things that they can do is look at districts that are not that far from their homes. Maybe they're in Riverside, maybe they're in Southern California, maybe they're up in Jefferson County, places where you don't really have to travel that far, where you can make a big influence. A lot of the nationwide Democratic leadership is hoping that if enough districts, if enough Congress seats in California turn, that there will be a major legislative change in Washington, D.C. So I hope that the students who've been super involved and will continue to be so get involved in these districts that are very close to them geographically and can affect change. And one of the things that I think we should be doing in a college like ours is offering independent study units and make it nonpartisan. Regardless of which candidate you support, if you're involved in the political process, that's part of that. You should get credit for that. That should be a no-brainer for us here at the JC.
I like that idea. I would do that class. So, are there any other further comments on that question? Please.
I just also wanted to remind everybody that student leaders in general who are doing this work, a lot of people here have the pleasure of having this as their employment, and we unfortunately, or fortunately rather, we're students, we're in school, we usually are full-time or part-time at least, we usually have to work outside of school, and that applies to high school students as well. And on top of that, we have to take care of our studies, we have to take care of our homes. Some of us are not younger students, we have families to take care of, children, significant others. And even if we're younger students, we have also our parents, our duties at home, we have bills to pay. And so let us also recognize that on top of everything else that we're doing as students, which is already jumbled, which is already a lot of students are taking the initiative to take one step even further than their further steps, and doing all this work to do activism, whether it's either driving on their days off to go to locations to march, organizing on whatever spare hours they have. Sometimes it means sacrificing things, and a lot of that times that means sacrificing the little social life you have. And so please be cognizant and be thankful for our student leaders, our amazing student leaders like we have here. But above all else, be patient with student leaders and communicate with them because we are also dealing with a lot on our plates as well.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move on just because we have 11 minutes left in our Q&A, and I'd like to get to some more questions. Okay, why does the NRA have so much political power when polls indicate that the public supports more gun control?
Well, the NRA has organized very effectively. They have a big organization, millions of folks, and the overwhelming number of NRA members are what you would call one-issue voters. So you could be, if you're an elected official, you could be with that person 99 and 9/10% of the time, but if you're not with them 100% on the gun stuff, they're not for you. And that's been a very effective strategy for them. They also spend a lot of money to influence the outcome of elections, and that resonates with some folks in elected office or some folks running for elected office. But surprisingly, they haven't been terribly successful in the electoral arena. They talk a good game, they give away a lot of money, but now there's a counterbalance, politically speaking. The Gabby Gifford group is the main group. They too raise money. They too support candidates. They too organize folks and turn them out at rallies and town hall meetings. You've got the Newtown group. You've got the Moms Against Gun Violence group. And they're becoming more and more active. So there's now a counterweight to them. I don't believe that their influence is as great today as it was last year at this time, and I suspect next year at this time it'll be even less. They're a little bit hamstrung because they've got competition within their own ranks. And don't laugh when I say this, but in the gun arena, the NRA is the liberal group. There's another group called Gun Owners of America who believe there should be no rules at all on guns, absolutely nothing. And every time the NRA acquiesces, Gun Owners of America come out and say, NRA is giving away your gun rights, you better quit them and join us. And every time that happens, they lose whatever their $25, $35 a year membership fee is, so it's a money issue to them. They're also going to be in a little bit of a hurt this year because their gun industry isn't doing as well this year as it was doing even last year. And it's a real misnomer, but the way the story goes is that if a Democrat's elected president, they're going to try and take away your guns. And whenever that happens, they really go out and they use scare tactics to people. Hey, you know, whoever it is, President Obama, President Clinton, Mike Thompson, Dianne Feinstein, whoever, they're Democrats. They want to take away your guns. So you better join the NRA, you better contribute money, you better get involved. And two things happen. Their popularity goes up and gun sales goes up. So now they elected this guy who's in the White House now, and NRA popularity is diminished. Gun sales have dropped, and they've dropped to the point that one of the, I think the oldest gun manufacturer in the country, Remington, has filed bankruptcy because they're not selling enough firearms. So I think that that's shifting a little bit. Michael Bloomberg and his Mayors Against Illegal Guns organization has been very influential. They've provided support to folks at the local level, specifically mayors who are taking a lead on gun violence prevention. So the playing field, it's not there yet, but it's starting to level.
Thank you. We have almost 5 minutes left in the Q&A, just so everyone is aware. And also, we have more cards than we'll be able to get through at the end of today. So just so everyone is aware, if I don't get to your question, I'm very sorry. We have limited time. And I'm going to address, we've been
But
addressing...
Robert will write a handwritten personal response for everybody.
I absolutely will. Thank you for reminding me of that. Since we've been addressing federal things, I'd like to go to more local. What is being done to secure SRJC buildings? When will Emeritus Hall have doors that lock and from the inside? And what about all the other buildings? And I'm going to point that towards Brownlee, unless anyone else would like to address that.
Anybody else want to address that one? So the district police, we work in cooperation with several departments here on campus, one of them being facility operations, where we can be security consultants and we kind of know and can give recommendations on how to make campus more secure. It comes down to facility operations to go through ADA requirements, fire requirements, I mean, a host of things, plus financial considerations to make these things happen. I know that LISAD is working with the FAC Ops team to get Emeritus more secure. They're looking at options right now. So that's being addressed as now. I can tell you the best option that the SRJC has is as new buildings come online, we have a computer-generated program that has all our locks on our newer buildings, this one included, where it's all on a key card access, where our dispatchers and a few other people here on campus can control it, where we can shut down buildings remotely in the event of an active shooter, per se. And we do have these plans in place, and we do have a plan of action. But we do still have some older buildings that have turnkey that we're trying to get up to have all in that computer system.
Okay, thank you. And that is a question I've been received a lot as a student trustee, so thank you, and that will help me further. Are there any other answers to that? Would you, please?
Just real quickly, I think when students are in a classroom with their colleagues, you get a sense, you get a vibe of who's in the room with you. When you feel that, if you feel uncomfortable about something, share it with your teacher. Let them know so they can take action, because we're part of a community. And the more we know the members of our community, the safer that we'll be. So I think having real clear communication with the people who you're sitting next to in class, and if at any time you feel uncomfortable with that, don't keep it to yourself.
I'd like to comment on that. Jeffrey, thank you so much for that. See something, say something. It's kind of become a motto through law enforcement throughout the country. Unfortunately, we see these events transpire in our country on a daily basis, it seems. I could tell you that less publicized are issues where someone saw something and they told it to a teacher, the teacher told the authorities, and an active shooter situation was prevented. It happens weekly in this country. If you see something, say something. We're here 24/7, 527-1000. Call 911. Let somebody know.
Thank you for that. And this will most likely be our last question. Constantly, assault-style weapons get the majority of media attention. What kind of reforms can be made to address gun violence in the U.S. that involve non-assault style weapons like handguns? And I bring that up because we've been focusing mostly on assault-style weapons throughout this whole debate, or the discussion. Please.
Well, I tried to speak to that a little earlier. The fact of the matter is, assault weapons aren't the weapon of choice in most killings, most murders. The numbers suggest that it's all weapons, but every day 30 people are killed by someone using a gun. If you add accidental accidents and suicide, it goes up to about 96 people a day. That's why we focused on the background checks, to make sure that we screen out those folks who shouldn't have guns, as I've said a number of times today, dangerously mentally ill and criminals. Check them. If you can identify them, they shouldn't have any gun. And you're right. the assault weapons are the ones that are brought up in the newspaper because those are the big shooting events. When the guy that went into Pulse nightclub, Las Vegas, San Bernardino, Sandy Hook, Parkland, assault weapons were made, they were designed, manufactured, and distributed to kill people. Now, the NRA has been masterful in trying to make them a sporting weapon. They've put on shooting events. They're now making them in hunting calibers, so it becomes a gun of choice for people who hunt, and making the threshold even higher in order to do any type of regulation against a particular type of gun. But they are out there, as I said, between 9 and 15 million of them, but the best way to deal with gun violence prevention is expansion of background checks.
Thank you, and we are at about time. So before I hand this off to Congressman Thompson, I just want to say thank you, everyone. And if you have any further questions, I'm your student trustee, and I will be your student trustee next year as well. And I intend to be. I'm on campus about 30 hours a week, and I'm in the office about that time too. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come to my office right down the hall. Thank you so much, everyone.
Robert, thank you very much, and I want to thank this outstanding panel. These folks were fantastic. Please give them a hand. And a big thank you to SRJC and Dr. Chong, and to Hillary, who worked tirelessly to make sure this was a success. So thank you very, very much. And thanks to all of you for coming. The only way we're going to fix this issue is if we all go shoulder to shoulder and make it happen. And I think I'm in pretty good company, and together we'll make it work. So thank you all very much.